Instant coffee. You probably have it in your kitchen right now. A brown powder in a glass jar. Add hot water. Stir. Done. It doesn't taste as good as brewed coffee. You know this. Everyone knows this. The flavor is thinner. The aroma is a pale copy of what comes out of a proper coffee machine. The experience is a reduction, a convenience trade-off that sacrifices quality for speed. And yet instant coffee accounts for more than 40% of all coffee consumed in the world. In some countries, it accounts for more than 90%. That is not the natural result of consumer preference. Nobody, given a genuine free choice between fresh brewed coffee and instant coffee with identical preparation time, chooses the inferior product. The dominance of instant coffee globally is not the result of taste. It is the result of engineering. Corporate engineering. Decades of market creation, psychological repositioning, and distribution strategy executed by a Swiss food company that needed to solve a very specific problem in 1930 and accidentally created the most consumed single beverage product in human history. The jar in your kitchen is not a convenience product. It is the endpoint of one of the most sophisticated food market creation operations ever executed. A product that was developed for a government contract, sold initially through wartime rationing, repositioned through gender psychology, and distributed to countries that had no coffee culture, until Nestlé gave them one. This is not a coffee story. This is a story about how one corporation changed what 3 billion people drink every morning. To understand what Nestlé did, you have to understand the problem they were asked to solve. Coffee has been cultivated, traded, and consumed since the 15th century. By the 19th century, it was one of the most internationally traded commodities in the world. Brazil alone was producing more than half of the world's coffee supply by 1900. And Brazil had a problem. Coffee is an agricultural commodity with extreme price volatility. When harvests are good, supply exceeds demand. Prices collapse. Farmers who have invested years in developing coffee plantations face economic ruin in a single season. By the late 1920s, Brazil was sitting on a surplus of coffee so large it was destroying the market. The Brazilian government had been attempting to stabilize prices through various mechanisms, buying excess stock, restricting supply, paying farmers to destroy crops. Nothing was working at sufficient scale. In 1930, the Brazilian Coffee Institute approached Nestlé with a specific brief: develop a shelf-stable coffee product that could be made from a surplus coffee stock and consumed without brewing equipment. A product that would increase total global coffee consumption by making it accessible to populations and situations where brewed coffee was impractical. This was not a consumer insight. This was a commodity surplus problem looking for a manufacturing solution. Nestlé's chemists, led by Max Morgenthaler, worked on the problem for 8 years. The technical challenge was significant. Coffee's flavor is produced by hundreds of volatile aromatic compounds, primarily furans, pyrazines, and aldehydes, that form during the roasting process and are released during brewing. Many of these compounds are unstable. They oxidize, evaporate, or degrade rapidly when exposed to heat, oxygen, or moisture, creating a dry powder that could be reconstituted with hot water, while retaining a recognizable coffee flavor profile required solving a preservation chemistry problem of significant complexity. The process Morgenthaler's team developed, and which Nestlé patented in 1938 as Nescafé, used spray drying combined with a carbohydrate carrier. Here is the chemistry. Brewed coffee extract, concentrated liquid coffee, is atomized into fine droplets and injected into a chamber of hot, dry air. The water evaporates almost instantaneously as the droplets fall. What remains are fine dry particles of coffee solids coated in a matrix of carbohydrates, initially dextrin, derived from coffee's own natural carbohydrate content. The carbohydrate matrix does two things. It protects the volatile flavor compounds from immediate oxidation by encapsulating them. And it creates a hygroscopic powder, one that absorbs moisture readily, which means when hot water is added, the powder dissolves quickly and the encapsulated flavor compounds are released. The product was not equivalent to brewed coffee. The spray drying process inevitably degraded some of the most volatile and desirable aromatic compounds. What remained was a simplified flavor profile, more bitter, less complex, with reduced top notes and an altered mouthfeel due to the absence of coffee's natural oils, which were removed during the concentration process. Nestlé knew this. They released it anyway. Because the product solved the stated problem. It was shelf-stable. It was portable. It required only hot water. And it was made from coffee, which meant it could be positioned as coffee to consumers who had no reference point for what chemically complete brewed coffee actually tasted like. Nescafé launched in Switzerland in 1938. Initial consumer reception in Europe was cautious. People who drank brewed coffee found it inferior. People who didn't drink coffee at all had no basis for comparison. That second group was where Nestlé saw the real market. The United States is at war. The military has a specific problem with coffee. American soldiers drink coffee. Heavily. It is embedded in military culture. But producing brewed coffee in field conditions, under fire, in jungles, in the middle of active combat operations, requires equipment, fuel, and time that operational conditions frequently cannot provide. The U.S. Army Quartermaster Corps needed a shelf-stable coffee product that could be included in field rations and consumed with cold water if necessary. They approached Nestlé. The contract Nestlé received was transformational. The U.S. military purchased virtually the entire Nescafé production output from several facilities for the duration of the war. Millions of cans. Distributed to American soldiers across every theater of operation. This is the same mechanism that Kraft's processed cheese and Jell-O had used to penetrate the American consumer market. Military feeding as forced product adoption. A soldier who drinks Nescafé for 3 years in the Pacific Theater has had his taste expectations recalibrated. When he returns home, Nescafé is familiar. It tastes like coffee to him. Not because it is equivalent to brewed coffee. Because it is what he has been drinking as coffee. Nestlé understood this. They had engineered the government contract not merely as revenue but as the largest brand trial program in their history. When American soldiers came home after World War II, Nestlé was ready. The product moved from military ration to civilian grocery shelf. The marketing positioned it as modern, efficient, and, crucially, the same coffee that American servicemen had been drinking throughout the war. Patriotic association. Military credibility. Consumer familiarity. The post-war American instant coffee market expanded rapidly. Not because consumers preferred the product. Because millions of consumers had been preconditioned by 3 years of field consumption to accept it as coffee. In the late 1940s and early 1950s, instant coffee faced a specific cultural resistance among American housewives. Consumer research conducted for Nestlé and competitor Maxwell House revealed a counterintuitive finding. When women were shown a shopping list that included instant coffee, they described the hypothetical shopper as lazy, poorly organized, and a bad wife. When the same list included ground coffee, the descriptors were positive, competent, caring, a good homemaker. This was not a rational response to product quality. It was a cultural judgment. Making coffee from scratch, grinding beans, measuring, brewing, was a domestic act that carried social meaning. Using instant coffee was perceived as cutting corners on a domestic responsibility. Nestlé's marketing response to this finding was systematic and sophisticated. They did not attempt to argue that instant coffee was equivalent to brewed coffee. They repositioned the activity of serving instant coffee, not as a shortcut, but as a demonstration of modern domestic intelligence. A sophisticated woman who valued her time. A housewife who was efficient rather than lazy. A consumer who understood that modern food technology existed to improve her life. The advertising imagery shifted. The women in Nescafé advertisements in the 1950s were well-dressed, organized, and clearly competent. They weren't serving instant coffee because they were lazy. They were serving it because they were smart enough to use modern tools. This is exactly the same psychological repositioning that General Mills had deployed with Betty Crocker cake mix, reframing industrial convenience as domestic intelligence rather than domestic failure. The strategy was identical. The decade was the same. Both companies had read the same consumer psychology research and arrived at the same answer. The resistance dropped. Instant coffee entered the American kitchen as a legitimate choice rather than an embarrassing shortcut. The most audacious element of Nestlé's instant coffee operation was not what they did in existing coffee markets. It was what they did in markets where coffee culture didn't exist. Japan is the most documented example. In the 1960s, Japan was not a coffee-drinking country. The national beverage culture was built around tea, green tea, specifically, with centuries of ceremony, preference, and cultural identity attached to it. Coffee was consumed by a small urban minority. There was no infrastructure for its mass adoption. Nestlé entered the Japanese market not with adult coffee drinkers as their target. They targeted children. They introduced coffee-flavored candy and desserts, products that associated the flavor of coffee with sweetness and pleasure rather than the bitter, acquired taste that adult coffee drinking required. They made coffee flavor familiar to an entire generation of Japanese children who had no pre-existing cultural relationship with the beverage. When those children grew up, coffee flavor was not foreign. It was nostalgic, comfortable, associated with childhood pleasure. Nestlé then introduced Nescafé to this primed adult consumer base. The adoption rate was dramatically higher than it would have been in an untreated market. This is multi-generational market creation. Nestlé did not wait for Japanese consumers to develop an interest in coffee. They installed that interest in children and then waited a decade for those children to become consumers. The Japanese coffee market today is one of the largest in the world. A country with no natural coffee culture, no historical coffee tradition, and a deep-rooted tea identity now consumes Nescafé at rates that rival traditional coffee-drinking nations. That transformation took approximately 30 years and began with candy. By the 1960s, Nestlé faced a different problem. Instant coffee had achieved mass market penetration in most Western countries and was expanding globally. But the product's quality ceiling was limiting its ability to compete with the growing specialty coffee movement. The solution was freeze-drying. Freeze-drying is a more expensive process than spray-drying but produces a superior product. Brewed coffee extract is frozen rapidly, at temperatures low enough to prevent the formation of large ice crystals that would rupture flavor compound structures. The frozen extract is then placed in a vacuum chamber. Under vacuum, ice sublimates directly to water vapor without passing through a liquid phase. This process removes water without the heat exposure that degrades volatile aromatic compounds in spray drying. The result is a freeze-dried granule that retains significantly more of the original coffee's complex flavor profile. The product was still not equivalent to fresh brewed coffee, but it was measurably better than spray-dried instant coffee. And, critically, it could be sold at a premium price point that positioned it as a step up from the mass-market product. Nestlé launched Taster's Choice in 1966, a freeze-dried instant coffee product positioned as premium instant. The marketing created a quality hierarchy within the instant coffee category itself. Standard instant, premium instant, each with its own price point, each serving a different consumer segment. This is category architecture, the deliberate creation of a quality ladder within a product category to capture multiple price points simultaneously. The same tactic that beer companies used with standard, premium, and craft positioning. The same tactic that works in virtually every consumer goods category where there is perceived quality differentiation. By creating Taster's Choice, Nestlé didn't just sell a better product. They expanded the ceiling of what a consumer would pay for instant coffee, and simultaneously made the standard product look more accessible by comparison. Coffee is one of the oldest and most globally significant traded commodities in human history. Coffeehouses shaped European intellectual culture in the 17th and 18th centuries. The coffee trade defined colonial economics. The act of brewing and consuming coffee has centuries of ritual, identity, and meaning attached to it in dozens of cultures. None of that history produced instant coffee. Instant coffee was produced in a Nestlé laboratory, in response to a Brazilian commodity surplus problem, by a chemist who was trying to spray-dry concentrated liquid into a shelf-stable powder. The product that resulted was an industrial approximation of coffee's flavor profile, not coffee itself, that had enough sensory similarity to the real thing to pass as a substitute for consumers who had no access to the original or had been conditioned to accept the substitute as the baseline. It was scaled through a US military contract that preconditioned millions of consumers. It was sold to American women through a psychological repositioning campaign that reframed their resistance as incompetence rather than good taste. It was introduced to Japan through children's candy. It was upgraded and repositioned as premium through freeze-drying technology. And it was distributed to every country with a functional retail grocery system until it became the default experience of coffee for 40% of the world's coffee drinkers. The jar in your kitchen contains a product that is the result of 80 years of deliberate market creation. Every decision that led to its presence there, the chemistry, the government contract, the marketing strategy, the multi-generational market seeding, was made by a corporation that needed to move surplus Brazilian coffee and discovered, in the process, that it could reshape what 3 billion people consider a normal morning beverage. Nescafé did not give the world coffee. It gave the world a corporate version of coffee and then systematically replaced the original with the copy wherever it had the distribution reach and the marketing budget to do so. The brown powder dissolves in 3 seconds. That convenience cost the world something it didn't know it was trading. Let us know in the comments what we should cover next. Thanks for watching.